Uh, Joseph, are you there?
Yes. Hey, how you doing?
Good to have you. I'm glad you could make it.
Yeah, glad I can make it. I'm so sorry. Running a little late.
Oh, that's okay. Like I said, hey man, technology happens as these things happen. The most important thing is we have this conversation and share information. And I definitely want to get your feedback on this. I've been saying, that the impact that there is this thing called the API community. There's reasons why it's called the API community. There's reasons why everyone was grouped together. I didn't go into that. You certainly can if you want to. One of the things that the pandemic has revealed is that specifically the Native Hawaiian community, Pacific Islander community, is feeling this impact far worse than white communities and Asian communities. And so this also brings to light, kind of a separation, a disaggregation of those communities for a variety of reasons. Now, that's me saying that. I'm going to want to talk specifically about, again, the impact on the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. But first, I want you to talk about what I just talked about.
Yeah, thank you, brother, for inviting me to this space. It's been I think a struggle for Pacific Islander peoples and Native Hawaiian peoples to advocate for our unique sort of category and understanding because our communities are very different. We're indigenous,
Mhm.
peoples, and I think similarly to our Native American siblings, right? We have that colonization history with the United States of America, right? And as they were creating all of these racial categories, it was convenient to just lump our communities, in with the Asian American community, right? And I think now more than ever, we're understanding that, anti-indigenous policies and also anti-black policies are sort of the same policies that continue to marginalize and displace Pacific peoples, right? And so, in the context of white supremacy and how it manifests into anti-blackness and anti-indigenous sentiments, we might not always be the target Pacific people, right? But we are also experiencing the evil, right? The negative impact of that, and as far as like erasure, as far as our communities not being able to access some of these critical supports for them to really thrive and survive, in the United States of America. And so I think the API category was something that came from up above, but we know that we must decolonize, right? We all must decolonize, right? Black people have to decolonize, Native people have to decolonize, Pacific people have to decolonize, and that's the same sort of calling also on our Asian American family, right? And one of those ways is to really honor sort of our indigenous identity as Pacific peoples as it relates to this empire.
Mhm.
And I think that's why it's critical. COVID, I mean, is devastating for our communities. Washington, Oregon, California, Alaska, Utah, wherever we're at, we have the worst infection and death rates. And that just speaks to that legacy, right? That legacy that our community has always had within these United States.
Have has it been difficult, for a number of reasons to, start this process of really again trying to have a separation for an understanding of the difference of the needs? Is this something now that you think people are aware of? And during a crisis, how have you been able to access again resources and things when your community is disproportionately impacted by this? And I mean, at the start of this thing, back in March, and we've been doing this since March. Something I knew for sure was that black folks, people of color, and poor people are going to be impacted more. Well, it took about a month for the rest of the country to get. But if you were one of those people, you already knew that you were going to catch hell worse than everybody else. Um, then it started coming to light, and now people are more aware of it. But this is an even more specific category in the minds of a lot of people. Have you been successful in drawing attention to this? And if so, let's hear about it.
Yeah. So, the last few decades, that erasure was really significant, right? And so essentially it made our community invisible. So we were not at any of the tables, right? When the state was creating tables, when we were also creating race equity tables, right? To mitigate some of that institutional racism. And, Black folks were there, Native folks were there. Quotation API folks were there, and so which really means that we were not there, right, as our unique community. And we know that it's so critical for peoples to be at the table, right? So historically we've been knocking on everybody else's door, trying to get our allies and other racial groups to support us, but I think with COVID it pushed it over the edge, because it was so clear, like you cannot deny like how real these impacts are, right? Especially in the health, with the health disparities for Pacific Islanders. And so I've been an anti-racist organizer for the last 15 years. Also have been under the leadership and training of the People's Institute, which is a Black-led organization out of New Orleans. And we know that, you have to practice some principles, right, in the ways that you organize. And so one of the anti-racist principles that we had to do was to build consensus with our community, right? Make sure people felt heard and people were at the table, and we were learning how to make moves collectively and not like make moves individually. And so you see that movement now building, not just here in Washington State, but across the continents of Pacific leaders really coming together and making strategic moves together. And so it's sad, we have this running joke in our community that it took for COVID for people to see us, because prior to COVID, we were dying from diabetes, we were dying from, all of heart disease, all of the other stuff. And also, you look at who's in our prison system. You see Black folks, you see Samoan, Tongan, you see, our Latin folks, our Native American folks in there, right? So, it's not just work that we have to do within the health system, but also with the other system, the carceral systems that our members, our siblings are also in there. And the other thing about the carceral system, one of our first victims of COVID was a Samoan gentleman that was locked up in one of the prisons. And that really just for us highlighted, how unsafe our folks are. It doesn't matter where they're at,
Mhm.
they're experiencing some sort of disparity.
Joseph, I all I can say is I overstand. My guest is Joseph Seia. Am I saying that correctly? Your last name?
Yep, that's it,
All
Joseph
right.
Seia. Yep.
And the executive director for the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington. We've been sharing some information and some background on you. Now let's talk about this. What is the impact that the coronavirus has had on your communities?
Yeah, so you're looking at a community that has a housing insecurity um, issue, right? So similar to Black folks, we're renting at 68%. So huge number renting, not owning their own homes, and oftentimes like they're living quote illegally by overcrowding a lot of the apartment complexes that are all over South King County and Pierce County. So you think about not having enough living space, so when the disease does become introduced, the whole family is sick, right? Um,
So
and then
multi-generational homes as well.
multi-generational homes living in two-bedroom apartments all throughout South King County and Pierce County, and we're talking about 10 to 15 people in these spaces. And so the housing insecurity issue is huge. And then you look at the unemployment claims, and Pacific Islanders have the highest per 100,000 of unemployment claims in King, Pierce, Clark, and also in Spokane County. And so you're really thinking about a community that has been half of their people that are supposed to be employed are unemployed, right? So you think about things just like basic foods, right? People are literally they need food on the table from day to day. And so one of the ways that we've responded to that is by doing all of these weekly food drives throughout the state of Washington, specifically for our community, so that they can save that $100, right? So they can pay a bill or something else, right? And so that, and then, with the unemployment system, the unemployment claims, a lot of our folks are not able to get that, because some of us come from the Northern Islands where they have to prove the I-94 status in order for them to get the basic unemployment insurance that they, have a right to, right? Because they
What
work
is
in your
that?
country.
That's a term that you may be familiar with, but everybody may. What kind of status is that again that you're talking about that they have to prove?
Yeah, yeah, so some of our Pacific Islander family come from Kofa nations, and those are nations that the U.S. has a specific treaty with, where essentially the U.S. government was doing a lot of the nuclear testing in the North Pacific, and there were a lot of nuclear fallout from that. People were sick from that, and so in the 70s, so there were treaties that were signed with these island nations, right? And so those our relatives from the Marshall Islands, from Palau, from the Federated States of Micronesia, they're able to come to the United States, but once they're here, they're unable to sort of get access to basic health care and all of the other provisions. And they also can work in this country because they have an I-94 status. But when it does come time to claim unemployment, that I-94 status becomes a problem because you have to produce this document in order for you to get unemployment. And if you don't produce it, then if you don't have it, it takes months for them to get it from Homeland Security. And so that's a tremendous barrier, right? Along with everybody else that's waiting in line for unemployment and aren't able to get it in a time, to feed their family or pay the rent.
And we've Joseph, we've talked about some of the other impacts, which is again part of this whole thing. Um, what about the impacts of the contagion itself, health wise? What it's doing to your communities?
I mean, it's one of those things where, like, the data is there, but we feel it, and, like, Pacific Islanders are facing, more than twice the rate of death compared to everybody else, and so we feel it. There's a funeral going on, and as like most communities of color, we have our rights, our grieving rights, and those are not obviously being able to be implemented during this time. So it's a very dehumanizing process, right? Where we're not able to uh, bury our loved ones with dignity, and so it's been hard, and also, the way for us to reach our communities is very different. It's not throwing facts at them, right? There has to be a different way that we talk to our peoples about the impact of COVID, and how they can keep their families safe. And so it's hard. And we're church folk too. We love Jesus, and so it's really hard for Pacific Islanders not to gather to worship, even though that's where a lot of also the infections are coming out of. So there's a responsibility that we have in our community to still have our spiritual and cultural practice, and also be able to maintain the safety of our peoples.
My guest again is Joseph Seia, Executive Director of the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington. We've been talking about, again, the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community specifically, which is normally grouped under something called API, Asian Pacific Islander, as a group. We talked a little bit, if you missed it earlier in the conversation, why that was the case. Some things that have been happening have been exacerbated because of the pandemic, which has shown specific concerns impacting the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community, and we've tried to talk about a few of those while drawing attention to this. And we've just got a couple minutes left, Joseph. And so I want you to go ahead and just share rather than me ask you, because I've got a bunch more questions I could ask. But in this last couple minutes, why don't you just share with our audience what you think they should hear in regards to the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community and the impact that the coronavirus is having on your communities?
Yeah, I mean, this is all of the ways that white supremacy has manifested through systemic erasure, right? And also all of the ways that Black, Brown, Indigenous people are not able to co-design some of these policies and these efforts to really, be able to lift up the health of our collective health, right? Specifically with Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander people, part of our unhealth is these really bad policies that continue to lump our communities together with the AA community that, does not, allow for any sort of direct funding or any sort of political voice that our community can then leverage, for the health of our peoples, right? And so we are working collaboratively with Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander people across this country to have a unified effort in really standing up our autonomy as a people. Not to mention, we are Indigenous people, and so there's also a lot of anti-Indigenous sentiments that continues to try to erase that. You go to Hawaii, you when you're up in Hawaii, you go to the tourist spots, you never learn that Pacific peoples are the people that that have rights to that soil, right? And then that's the same case with Guahan, the Guam Islands, the Mariana Islands, the Samoan Islands, right? And people forget about the history of colonization. And so part of the reason why we're lifting up Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander as a separate group from Asian Americans is to really honor and center the indigenous identities of our peoples. Not to mention, there's I mean, we also have. I mean, it's just we are a huge community, right? We occupy the biggest ocean, and we've also been part of the diaspora, to the United States in the last 200 years, and so a very unique history that needs to be honored and elevated, so that we can stand alongside, our Native siblings, our Black siblings, our Latinx siblings, our Asian siblings, and fight together. If there's more of us at the table, that's a bigger fight, right? um yeah, and that's what we're really pushing for.
Joseph, thanks for joining me, man. Good talking to you. And you've got room for your voice here on Rainier Avenue Radio anytime you need to get information out. uh, to your community, to other communities, you've always got a place to do that right here on Rainier Avenue Radio. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you, brother. Thank you for having me.
Again, coming up here in a bit will be Gordon McHenry Jr., CEO of United Way of King County. We're going to talk about their rental assistance program, other programs that they have during this pandemic, specifically geared to helping the community. We'll find out also how United Way of King County itself has been impacted by the coronavirus. We'll be back right after this.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not being reprimanded by traffic cops, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
On Rainier Avenue Radio.world, look for the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show. I'm Dennis Weaver, your good food guide and host, helping you to feel good and look good, and who wouldn't want some of that? All that and more from the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Stories, songs, and guests. Begin living the organic good food life, and the rest of your life just may be the best of your life. Hose up, baby, to your help.
Wash your hands, don't touch your face, wipe things down, clean up your space. When you cough and sneeze, do responsibly. If you feel you're getting ill, isolate at home and chill. No, you're not alone. Please pick up your phone and call 206-477-3977. King County 206-477-3977. Public Health 206-477-3977. King County 206-477-3977. Public Community Radio Station will provide you with more information. Say Rainier Avenue Radio. Your community radio station will provide you with more information. Rainier Avenue Radio.